There was a knock on my door at exactly 11:47 p.m. At first, I thought it might be my son Donald. Maybe he left his keys again. But when I opened the door, my heart almost stopped. It was Fred, my son's college lecturer, the man I had slept with 3 weeks earlier, the man who promised we would forget it ever happened. He was soaking wet from the rain, eyes bloodshot, and holding something in his hand. "I did not come here for you," he said. "I came to tell you the truth. Before he finds out another way." My knees went weak, because what Fred knew what we had done could shatter everything between me and my son. And deep down, I deserved it. But I had no idea how much worse it was about to get. Before I go any further, I just want to say thank you for being here. If you have already subscribed, you have no idea how much your support means to me. And if you are new or watching without subscribing, thank you as well. I truly cannot wait for you to hit that subscribe button. It is the fuel that powers this channel and keeps stories like this going. Please do not forget to share your thoughts in the comments. Your opinions, your experiences, and your honesty. They matter more than you think. Now let me take you back to where it all began, before the secrets, before the betrayal, before the night Fred showed up at my door. My name is Emma. I am 46 years old, divorced, and living in Providence, Rhode Island. I have one son, Donald. He is 20 and the light of my life. When his father and I split up 3 years ago, Donald was the only thing that kept me going. So when he moved out last fall to attend university, I will not lie, it hit me hard. The house felt too quiet. I felt invisible. I threw myself into work, yoga classes, wine nights, anything to fill the silence. But loneliness is not just a feeling. It is a hunger. And I was starving. In October, Donald invited me to his university for a parents' and professors' open house. He sounded excited. "You have to meet Professor Fred," he said. "He is the coolest literature lecturer I have ever had." I was just happy he wanted me there. That day, I wore my favorite blouse. Not to impress anyone, just to feel seen. Then I met Fred. Tall, silver-streaked hair, sharp, thoughtful eyes. The kind of man who made you feel like the only person in the room when he spoke to you. He was kind, warm, and funny in a dry, quiet way. He complimented my taste in books. We talked about poetry and wine and Rhode Island winters. I left that day thinking it was just a nice chat. But 2 days later, I got an email from Fred. He found me through the parent contact list. He said it was harmless to reach out. I knew better. I felt the line being crossed. Still, I replied. We met for coffee, just as friends. Then dinner. Then late-night phone calls where he said things no one had said to me in years. Things about how smart I was, how young I seemed, how beautiful. I knew it was dangerous. But every time I looked in the mirror, I saw someone coming back to life. Then it happened. It was not planned. One night, after a long conversation about loneliness and failed marriages, he kissed me, and I let him. We slept together in my house, in my room, while my son was away for a weekend trip with friends. Afterward, I stared at the ceiling, cold with guilt. Fred sat on the edge of the bed, pulling on his shirt. "You are going to regret this," he said quietly. I asked him what he meant. He did not answer. And that was the last time I thought I would ever see him, until he showed up at my door 3 weeks later, in the middle of the night, holding something that could destroy my entire life. When Fred showed up that night, I thought maybe it was guilt that brought him. Maybe he came to apologize, or to ask for another chance. But what he pulled from his coat pocket was not flowers. It was an envelope. He placed it on my kitchen counter. His hands were shaking. "You should read that," he said. "Before Donald does." I looked down. Inside the envelope were printed screenshots, dozens of them, our emails, flirty texts, a few blurry photos of Fred leaving my house. I felt my heart cave in.
Who sent these to you?
I asked. I do not know, Fred said. But someone sent them to the university ethics committee too. And if Donald finds out from them, it will be unforgivable. I could not speak. I could barely breathe. Fred's voice dropped. You need to prepare yourself. Because this is not going away. The days that followed were unbearable. Every phone call from Donald made my stomach twist. Every time my doorbell rang, I feared it was an investigator, or worse, my son. But nothing happened. Not at first. Donald was still cheerful, still calling to tell me about classes, about a girl he was seeing, about how Fred had started mentoring him personally for a summer writing scholarship. That nearly broke me, because I was living a lie. And Fred was still playing some sick game. I tried to cut him off. I blocked his number. I ignored his emails. I even considered confessing to Donald myself. But every time I came close, I pictured his face and how it would change when he realized what I had done. Then something strange happened. I ran into Fred again. Not at school. Not by accident. He showed up at the bookstore I go to every Thursday. I know what you are thinking, he said as I tried to walk past him. But you do not understand what is really going on. I stared at him. Then explain it to me. Fred hesitated, then leaned in. You remember your sister? Kayla? I blinked. What does she have to do with this? He smiled bitterly. She broke me, Emma. Years ago. We dated. Your family treated me like trash. Do you even remember that? I had no words. I barely remembered the details. I was in college back then. Kayla never told me much. Fred continued. I lost my job, my reputation, everything. Your mother called me beneath your family. Now here I am, and your son looks up to me. The way he said that last part, it made my blood run cold. You are using him, I whispered. You are using me. Fred shrugged. I did not plan this, but maybe it is justice. I left without another word. That night, I tossed and turned in bed, wondering what kind of man I had let into my life, into my home, into my son's world. The next day, it got worse. I came home from work and saw Donald's car parked outside. He was in the living room, scrolling through something on his phone. Hey, Mom, he said. I had dinner with Professor Fred. He said some interesting things about our family. Did you know he used to know Aunt Kayla? My stomach dropped.
What
did he say? I asked. Donald raised an eyebrow. Nothing direct. Just hinted that our family kind of ruined his life. I asked why he was telling me that. He just laughed and said, Your mother will know. I tried to keep my face still, but I could feel myself going pale. Donald kept looking at me.
Mom,
is there something going on I should know? I shook my head, but I could feel my whole world cracking. The lies were too thin, the guilt too heavy. And Fred, he was no longer a mistake. He was a threat. That night, I watched from the hallway as Donald FaceTimed Fred. They were laughing about a literature essay. Then I heard Fred say something that nearly stopped my heart. She is so clueless. Donald laughed.
Who?
Mom? Fred did not answer, but he smiled. And in that moment I knew this had never been about romance. This was a setup. A long, calculated one. I did not sleep that night. I kept replaying Fred's smirk. The way he looked through the screen, like he had won something. But what haunted me more was the way Donald had laughed along. Innocent, unaware, like he had no idea the man he looked up to was mocking the woman who raised him. I knew then what I had to do, even if it meant destroying the one relationship that still meant something to me. I had to tell my son the truth. The next morning, I asked Donald to meet me for breakfast. He was cheerful, casual, completely unprepared for what I was about to say. I started slow, told him there was something I had hidden from him, that it was about Fred. His face shifted immediately. What do you mean? I need you to listen, I said.
Please.
Let me finish before you say anything. And then, I told him everything. How I met Fred at the university event. How we started talking. How it crossed a line. How I hated myself for it. How I ended it as soon as I realized what was really going on. And how Fred was not who he pretended to be. Donald stared at me in stunned silence. Then he stood up. He did not shout. He did not cry. He just said, I cannot believe this. I reached for his hand, but he pulled away. You slept with my professor, he said. You let him into our life. You let him use you. And now he is using me. I tried to explain. I begged him to understand. But I could see it in his eyes. The betrayal had cut too deep. I need time, he said. Then he left. And this time, I did not stop him. The weeks that followed were a blur. I called. He did not answer. I texted. Nothing. I heard from his friend, Leah, that Donald moved in with her family temporarily. Said he needed space from everything. It hurt, but I understood. And then, something unexpected happened. Fred disappeared. Not just from Donald's life, but from the entire university. Rumors began to circulate. Ethics complaints. Boundaries crossed. Inappropriate mentorship. I did not know if my story had triggered an investigation or if someone else had stepped forward. Either way, he was gone. I never heard from him again. And honestly, I never wanted to. It took 2 months before Donald finally came back. He showed up one Sunday evening just as the sun was going down. Same way he used to when he was a teenager coming home from a sleepover. He stood in the doorway, silent. I looked up from the kitchen sink. My heart nearly stopped. Hey, he said. I nodded.
Hey.
He stepped inside. The house was still the same. But we were not. He sat down across from me, looked me in the eyes. I am still angry, he said. But I have been thinking a lot. I swallowed hard. You do not owe me anything, Donald. I failed you. He shook his head. You are my mom. You are also human. I wish you had told me the truth sooner. I was afraid, I admitted, of losing you. He nodded. You almost did. We sat in silence for a long time. Then he said, but you are still my mother. And I want to understand. Maybe not all at once. But someday. It was not forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a start. Looking back, I realize now. Betrayal does not always come from malice. Sometimes it is born out of pain, loneliness, a desperate need to feel alive again. That does not make it right, but it makes it real. Fred used me. He manipulated my guilt, my history, my family's past. But the biggest betrayal was how I betrayed myself. By not listening to that voice inside that told me to stop. By choosing silence over truth. But secrets rot everything they touch. And healing, real healing, only begins when the truth is dragged into the light. No matter how ugly it is. To everyone watching, thank you for staying with me through this story. If you felt something, if it reminded you of a moment where love, guilt, or betrayal collided in your own life, I would truly love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support means everything, and it helps these stories reach someone who might need to hear them. Until next time, choose honesty, even when it hurts.